We good? Yeah, we're recording. Okay. Hello. I would like to give you my analysis of The Merchant of Venice, Act 4, Scene 1, from line 64 to 104. This excerpt is a conversation between Bassanio, Antonio, the Duke, and Shylock as they're in court trying to decide whether or not Shylock will be allowed and will cut a pound of Antonio's flesh in order to pay back Antonio's debt to Shylock. Now, in the excerpt, Bassanio offers Shylock the money back instead, and he even offers to double it. But Shylock does not accept the offer, saying that no amount of money will make him change his mind and make him forget the debt that he was originally promised, which was a pound of Antonio's flesh, which would, of course, kill him. Now, this part of the story marks a very critical point of the play, as it's very close to the climax. So we have this build-up, we have these tensions and this conflict between the characters Antonio and Bassanio, who you could argue are at this point seen as the protagonists, and Shylock seen as the antagonist. But it's also arguably here the audience gets truly conflicted between who's actually the good guys and the bad guys, so to speak. And you get this impression that the conflict between who's right and who's wrong, or who's just and who's unjust from the very get-go, when there's a conversation only between Bassanio and Shylock with these very short questions they ask each other. For example, Bassanio saying, "Do all men kill what they do not love?" Whereas to Shylock answers, "Hates any man the things he would not kill." And so from the very beginning of this excerpt, you realize the tension and the feelings involved, and this conflict. Another thing that's very interesting to look at when discussing stylistic devices is the two larger monologues in the story, the monologue by Antonio at first, and later a monologue, Shylock's monologue. Now, Shylock's monologue is very interesting to look at because it differs very much from Antonio's and from what else happens in the excerpt, as Shylock's monologue contains several exclamation points and question marks. Now, the exclamation points makes Shylock look very desperate, and the exclamation points does so that Shylock, that you can really see Shylock's anger that has been built up within him, and his need or his want to get this revenge over Antonio. And the question marks are also very interesting, as despite the fact that this is a conversation between two people, and not something Shylock is saying to himself or the audience, this monologue still begins to look a little bit like a soliloquy, because he asked the Christians, or Antonio and Bassanio, several questions, such as, "What judgment shall I dread doing no wrong?" And by asking them these questions, the audience also begins to reflect over it. It's like these questions are also indirectly, you could argue, being asked to the audience, as they have to reflect, as they're forced to reflect over the questions that are asked. And this is very similar to a previous monologue by Shylock, in which he says, and I believe it's in Act 3, where he describes the difference between Christians and Jews, where he says, "If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh?" And once again, this shows Shylock's inability to understand what everyone really has against him, other than his religion. And I'll get back to this. The play also, it's very important to mention, in this play there are a lot of metaphors, especially in Antonio's monologue. Antonio uses a lot of metaphors in order to describe Shylock and Shylock's refusal and unwillingness to pay back the debt to or Shylock's to accept the offer from Bassanio. I'm sorry. For example, Antonio says, "I pray you, I pray you think you question with the Jew. You may as well go stand upon the beach and bid the main flood bade his usual height," which uh, to translate that into a language that I understand would be the same as saying, "There's no reason in arguing with the Jew. You might as well go stand at the ocean and tell the waters to shrink and become smaller." And these metaphors, you could argue, are used in order to more clearly describe um, Shylock's unwillingness to accept the offer. Um, Another thing that's very interesting to look at is when we talk stylistic devices is the use of blank verse. The entire excerpt is written in iambic pentameter, and of course, this is Shakespeare is very known for doing this, and it's probably done in this excerpt to, of course, create rhythm, which blank verse and iambic pentameter does, but also to make it stand out as previously mentioned. This is a pretty critical point, or a very a point, a part of the play which is very filled with tension, with conflict between the protagonist and the antagonist. Um, Also, it's a formal setting, which is also an argument for why iambic pentameter has been used. They're in court. The Duke is there. He also has a line, and it's a formal setting. And Shakespeare might also have used blank verse in order to show that it's in a more formal environment. Um, when we looked at these things, when we looked at now that we've looked at Shylock's almost desperate, desperate way of acting in his monologue, you can move on to the themes, which one of the main ones in this excerpt is the theme of revenge. Shylock's, I wouldn't say want, but more Shylock's need to get revenge over Shylock, over Antonio, where it could be argued that revenge, or the reason why he wants this revenge, is not that much because he has principles of people having to pay back his debt. I'm sure he also had a second that he said, but this could be argued that this need for revenge has a lot more to do with the anti-Semitism, the hatred, the bigotry that he, as a Jew, has faced throughout his entire life and throughout him talking to Antonio. This is also another stylistic device that Shakespeare has used by when Antonio and Bassanio are speaking throughout this excerpt. They doesn't mention Shylock by name, not even once. They always mention him simply by calling him Jew, which is a way of dehumanizing him and making him not a person, but a part of a bigger religion, another social group, and so that's the theme of anti-Semitism. And when it comes to this use of this word use of using the Jew instead of Shylock's name, you could move on to see a theme which could be arguably Antonio as a Christ figure or a martyr, as he says at one point, "Just let me receive my punishment and let the Jew take his penalty." Now, this is basically, you could argue, Antonio saying, "I will sacrifice myself for the greater cause. Let the Jew kill me." And throughout history, Jews have, as part of the anti-Semitism they have felt, been accused several times of being the ones who crucified Jesus Christ, the ones who put him on the cross. And you never know if that's what Shakespeare has meant when he's done that, or that's simply something we've interpreted later. But that's certainly a theme that's important to mention when you talk about this anti-Semitism. Those are some of the most important points of this excerpt that I've chosen to focus on today. Thank you.